This is for the revision of OCR FP1. The topic is Matrices and Transformations, and it's June 2010, question 5. So in the question there are two parts. First of all, we've got to write down the matrix that represents a reflection in the line y equals x. And then in part B, two parts. First of all, we've got to describe fully the geometrical transformation represented by the matrix 5, 0, 0, 1. And then in part 2, we've got to again describe fully the geometrical transformation represented by this matrix. So let's just have a look at part A first of all. Now notice it does say in part A that we could write it down. You may well remember it, but the important thing about reflection in the line y equals x is that if you take the point 1, 0, then that will be mapped onto the point 0, 1, and the point 0, 1 will be mapped onto the point 1, 0. So that means in terms of our matrices that means that the first column which of your identity matrix, which is 1, 0, will become 0, 1, and the second column, which was 0, 1, will become 1, 0. And so this is the matrix that we need. I'll call it M. And then in part B, we have this matrix 5, 0, 0, 1. So what that is telling us is that the point 1, 0 has been mapped on to the point 5, 0, because instead of having 1, 0 here on our identity matrix, we've got 5, 0. So it's been stretched in the x direction, scale factor 5. And if we consider what's happened to 0, 1, you see that hasn't changed at all. So that's the only thing that's happened with that matrix. So in part 1, we want to describe it fully, so we need to know that it's a stretch in the x direction and scale factor 5. For part 2, now when you see things like a half root 3 and so on, you should recognise some of these as from your trigonometry, and the fact that they look like sines and cosines of angles, for example 30 and 60. So you remember that you have got a formula book, so you should compare it with your formula book. And in fact, if you go, you will see that you have in a formula book a formula which is cos theta, sine theta, and then there's a minus, just as we have here, minus sine theta and a cos theta. So it looks as though these two are the same. So what angle has a cosine of a half? So hopefully you'll know that it's 60 degrees. And again, these are the same, and you should know that the sine of 60 is also root 3 over 2, or a half root 3. So it is a rotation of 60 degrees clockwise so a rotation of 60 degrees about the origin, I could say here too. Clockwise. So in total we had 6 marks, so let's just have a little look at how those marks are allocated. So we got literally 1 mark for each of these things here, where we said that this was 0, 1, so you get 1 mark for that column, and it's a B mark because you were just told to write it down. So 1 mark for each column. In part B, the first part, you got 1 mark for being a stretch and 1 mark for the fact that it had in the x direction. So you needed all of those bits of information. And then for the next part, seeing that it was a rotation of 60 gave you a mark, and that it was clockwise also gave you a mark. So do remember that there are further revision videos that you can access by going to the Further Maths website.